Hey guys, David Tao with barbend.com, and today we're talking about the Professional Fitness Athletes Association. Some are calling it a union for CrossFit athletes. It's not that. There are some key differences that we'll go over, but it is pretty interesting, and we have some interviews and quotes from key figures within the organization talking about their goals and what they might accomplish in the sport of fitness. But first, make sure you subscribe to Barbend on YouTube to stay up to date on all things strength. That's not only CrossFit, but that's weightlifting, powerlifting, strongman, anything related to strength sports, we've got you covered. Just hit that subscribe. So obviously a lot has been changing in the CrossFit world over the last few months. Greg Glassman stepped down as CEO. He announced he was selling the company to Eric Roza. A lot's going on. Oh, and the CrossFit Games are delayed by several months. We actually made a video on that, which we'll link to in a card right about here. And in the midst of all this, it was announced that CrossFit athletes were coming together, and CrossFit athletes, I mean, top CrossFit Games athletes, actually all 60 individual qualified athletes for the 2020 CrossFit Games have come together to form the PFAA, Professional Fitness Athletes Association. But what is the PFAA? Well, I'll put it in their words for an introduction. The Professional Fitness Athletes Association is a nonprofit association that acts on behalf of all athletes competing at functional fitness competitions, not just the members of the PFAA. Until now, athletes have been a collection of individual voices. This is a start to creating unity. So it's an organization for athletes who compete in functional fitness. That could be official CrossFit events or non-CrossFit events. But what are the goals of the PFAA? Well, they've listed the following goals on their website, which is a pretty simple template they put up. But again, a lot of this is just in development. I do want to emphasize that we have talked to some key members of the PFAA, including Brent Fikowski and Cole Sager. And a lot of the questions are fairly answered with, we're still figuring it out. But here are the goals they've outlined so far. Work on projects that will safeguard the health and safety of athletes at competitions. Create frameworks so competitions operate consistently, fairly, and adhere to high standards. Improve communication between event organizers and athletes. Directly cooperate with companies and individuals outside the PFAA to give input on shaping the competition season. Work to establish what is in the best interest of athletes currently in competitions, while also ensuring the growth of competitions for future athletes. So basically, it's an organization to bring together athletes in functional fitness to give their perspective, their take, and basically give them a voice at the table when it comes to how competitions are run, safety standards at competitions. A pretty interesting series of goals, and something that's actually been in discussions apparently among some top level athletes in the community for 5, 6, 7, maybe even 8 years, but it's really only this summer that things kicked off in an official capacity. Brent Fikowski, a multi-time CrossFit Games athlete and a podium finisher, incorporated the organization in June of 2020. And we spoke with both him and Cole Sager, who was elected to the interim executive committee of the PFAA, about the goals, the why behind the PFAA, and early conversations they've had with event organizers and other key stakeholders in the fitness community. Let's hear it from Cole. So Cole, when did you first hear about the concept of some sort of professional organization for athletes in competitive fitness? Like, when did that first cross your radar?
Yeah, that's actually funny because I've been competing with Brent for a long time. And, I love Brent's mind. He's always looking out for how can things be better? How can things be driven further down the road into just a better environment? And so it was actually something that I've heard him talk about a couple times throughout the years. And just maybe in passing. And I think that a lot of us, through conversation with just people in the space, always had a keenness and an awareness that something like this could take place, that there's a need for it. And so it's something that hasn't been, that just kind of came out of the middle of nowhere. But really when earlier this year, when we saw a lot of the things changing with the season, throughout the sanctional season, and how that's been developing, we've started to hear a little bit more buzz about like, hey, how can we use our voice as athletes and just help drive the sport forward?
When did this feel like it was more than just an idea? Because you've heard it as an idea over the last few years. When did this feel like you're like, oh, well, this is going to become something in 2020?
Yeah. Well, it was really based around, I think, when things started to become real, when the information with Greg Glassman came out earlier this year, and athletes started to come together and organize, like truly organize with each other. And we started to have a deeper conversation of like, how can we take this further? And that was really kind of a turning point for the structure of it, and just having athletes begin to organize and come together. And, we're in a very individualistic sport. And so it's not very common for athletes to come and band together. And once we started to organize, it really, that's when the strength behind the unity that we have really started to form.
Now, one thing that's, I think, most impressive to me is, and it wasn't an overnight thing and something that's been talked about, but all 60 qualified individual competitors for this year's CrossFit Games are now members of the PFAA.
Mm-hmm.
Getting 60 people to do anything is kind of crazy. Like, I don't think I could get 60 people to agree on anything.
No
so
kidding.
what was that process like, kind of at a high level?
I think it was really it came down to just a realization that we all have a common passion for the sport, and that we want to see it, we really want to see it to continue to improve throughout the years. And like I mentioned, once we started to organize and we started to have that conversation and people started to realize that, I think it became very easy to realize, like, hey, like, maybe let's join this organization together and get more voices in it, because we're stronger together than we are individually. And once people had that realization, it became very clear, because we all care about the sport and we all want to see it grow. And yeah, from there, just kind of everybody jumped right in.
Now, not asking you to name names at all, but was there any hesitation? I mean, with anything new, there are always questions and people playing devil's advocate, looking at pros and cons. Obviously, you see a huge benefit in this, which is why you're putting your name and your voice and your energy behind it. But were there any kind of hesitations? And if so, what kind of questions did those focus around at the beginning?
There wasn't much hesitation, and I think that's one of the things that I'm most impressed by, is because there isn't really anything to lose. We're not out to gain anything that is unreasonable, or to make any moves or make any statements that like we're not bashing on anybody. We're here to just, because we care about the sport. We want to help. As athletes, we see things from just a different angle. It's like we're the ones who are in it. We're the ones that see it firsthand and experience what people are, how people are putting on events or how people are running the sport. And all we want to do is we want to see, and this is actually one of the things that I love the most about a lot of our meetings, is we spoke heavily about the generations to come, and thinking about further down the line of what the sport can be for future athletes. Like, well, if we can at least provide the insight and the knowledge, the things that we have gone through and experienced to help guide the sport, even if it's just presenting the information. It's like, here it is. This is what we don't have anything to lose with that. We're just trying to help the sport just continue to grow and get better, so more people can enjoy it down the road.
And one thing that's been impressive about a lot of organizations, but particularly organizations that are just starting up, like the PFAA, during all this time, is you haven't had all the members in a room, in the same room. This has been happening via Zoom. This has been happening emails. I'm sure every digital form of communication. Is there a plan, maybe in the future, maybe not right now, is there a plan to hold any sort of summit or gathering of all the members of the PFAA? Has that been discussed?
That hasn't really been discussed. Us just being so young and so new. It's like, how can we come together and just create some momentum to just even start looking at some of the most immediate things, or just looking into the 2021 season. And so, even currently right now, we came together as a group and we voted in 8 executive committee members, and they're just there for the interim. They're just for a 6-month period, just to get us started, get us off our feet, get us going, and kind of help lead the group to that point where we can start making those bigger, maybe come together at a summit in the future. But it's definitely something that we'll tackle down the road.
I do want to make sure we talk about one of the core tenets of the PFAA, and you all outlined some basic goals, like saying, hey, here's what our organization is, and here's generally what we want to focus on. And one of those was athlete safety. and consistency at events.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about some of the concerns that have come up among the elite athlete pool over the last few years when it comes to athlete safety at events?
I think that one of the biggest things is just like, a couple things. Like, we want to be able to do this long term. Like, any athlete wants a long career, and that's, whether it's the ones who've already had a decently long career, we want to extend that, or people who are coming in, we want them to be able to have long careers. And a lot of that just gets tied around safety and standards, and that's one of our main focuses in the immediate interim and the 2021 season is how can we address safety and standards at events. And that it's, we're not just talking about just the CrossFit Games or something like that. We're talking about just all events. So, and hopefully what we can do is we can get this honed in enough that it can become public information, and anybody who puts on a functional fitness event can have these standards, have these safety rulings, so that everybody can have a fair, safe event that everybody can enjoy. And that comes from things as simple as what the competition floor layout looks like. If you have athletes who are too close together in lanes, and you're dropping barbells, and there's a chance of getting hurt, getting injured. So just being aware of that. And again, this is coming from the lens of an athlete. Things that we see on the floor is different than what you guys see when you're spectating, or what event organizers think that they put on, but we're the ones actually experiencing it. So we just have that, and that's essentially just what we want to provide. Is like, here, this is the lens that we see things through. Maybe think about this next time. And it's not, we're not trying to do it out of any sort of animosity as much as just like, hey, we want to be helpful, and then one of the other things that comes to mind is just safety and standards in programming. Like, hey, can we make sure that we're programming a good, safe event where we're not doing too much things, or things that would ultimately put people in harm's way, or potentially, damage somebody's body by overdoing it or something like that. So just having those standards laid out is something that we really think that we're really passionate about as a group, that we think can make the sport more enjoyable for everybody.
Yeah, and it also gives spectators a better idea of like what to expect, because if people have, if they're on the same page about like what the sport entails and what that might look like, that ultimately makes it easier to follow, or at least more intuitive.
Exactly.
Have you all started chatting with? And I kind of already know the answer, but I want to get it here. Have you all started chatting with? Have you all started conversations with event organizers around the PFAA's goals?
Yeah, and it's been humble conversation at this point, just sharing our hearts, letting them know like, here, this is where we're coming from. They've been very receptive, and it's been wonderful. I think everybody understands that we just want to help. That's really all we're coming from. We want to have a voice in the sport, and they've been really receptive to that, because they also want to grow, and that's part of. I think it's a testament to our community, is everybody just wants to grow and they want to get better. So they've been really receptive to any feedback and any information that we've wanted to give.
One thing that I know I've chatted a little bit with Brent about, and it's kind of up in the air, but it's how do you become a member of the PFAA? Do you have to have qualified for a certain event? Do you have to have a certain number of events kind of under your belt? It's not a union, because you're not all working for the same employer, right? Yeah, so it's not like it could be in the NFL or the MLB or something like that. What are some of the initial conversations or thoughts regarding what membership qualifications are going to potentially be?
Yeah, that is actually something that has not been able to be addressed at this point, just because we're so young, and we have other matters that we have just wanted to look at in the immediate future. But it is something that has been on our radar. We're actually currently working through some bylaws and different things to really hone that in for the future, so that we can have that and make sure that people have a fair chance of joining the PFAA if they would like to.
Gotcha. And I think the last thing I wanted to ask is, and this I could ask the 8 interim board members and probably get 15 different answers on this one. But what are some of your near term, and I guess I mean for 2020, let's call it for the rest of the year, where it's a competition calendar where everything's still kind of up in the air. Like, we know when the CrossFit Games are probably supposed to happen, but even that's still a little up in the air. Other events, who knows? What are some of the things that you think the PFAA can potentially accomplish this year, or I guess I should say before the 2021 season?
One of the things that we have been, again, just really focusing on is the safety and standards for the immediate future. And that doesn't start with just 2021. That really, we've been able to have some great conversations with people for 2020. And, we've seen an increase in receptivity of individuals of receiving the information that we feel like we want to provide, and just say, again, this is just the lens and perspective that we see things from. And that's been really cool. And so, whatever the 2020 season looks like, whatever that is, I think, I have some hope for the future, and just that it's going to be, it's just going to be better than it's ever been. We have a lot of voices who are coming together because they want to see the sport grow, from event organizers to the CrossFit Games staff to now the athletes wanted to stand in unity and have a voice. And I think that you're just going to see that. And it's not massive changes. That's the beauty of it. And I think that's where a lot of us get distracted by it. Like, we want to see these big, massive changes. It's just small incremental things that add up over time that make a sport great. And I think that's where we really want to put our focus on.
One of the first things the PFAA did was elect an interim executive committee to guide the organization's growth and really formation, because a lot of these things are still getting figured out over the next 6 months. That executive committee consists of tia-clair, Patrick Vellner, Brent Fikowski, Chandler Smith, Stephanie Chung, Adam Neefer, Jen Ryan, and Cole Sager. In addition to talking to Cole, I was also able to catch up a little bit with Brent Fikowski, who incorporated the organization earlier this year and has been a driving force behind its early goals, the organization, and really bringing a lot of these athletes together. Here's what Brent had to say when I asked him what the next steps were for the PFAA in 2020. To increase the safety and fairness at competitions for athletes, we're working as a group of athletes to compile a specific list detailing what is and what is not safe, so we can present those expectations to event organizers. We are also working to create standards on how competitions can improve fairness. It's a big task, but we want to ensure every athlete has an equal opportunity to display their fitness, eliminating any discrepancies between heats or between lanes. So like both Cole and Brent said, a big point of the PFAA is giving the athletes perspective to event organizers so events can hopefully become safer and more consistent. Are these consistent tests of fitness? That's a really big emphasis here as well. I do want to give a shout out to Armand Hammer. He's a fitness content creator and athlete who we've actually featured before on our podcast, and he released a video with his own take on the PFAA and how it is kind of a culmination of larger conversations that have been occurring in the space for a number of years. And I chatted with Armand a little bit off camera, and he actually gave a quote regarding his kind of summation of his thoughts on the PFAA and what it could potentially do. I'm excited to see the athletes in the sport come together and make a seat at the table for themselves. Between new leadership at CrossFit HQ and the quickly changing competitive landscape, now is the best time for an entity like the PFAA to step in and ensure a successful future for current and future stakeholders. They face an uphill battle, and they won't be able to do it on their own, but I'm confident they'll be able to move the sport forward in a positive and significant way. We'll make sure to link Armand's take in the description below this video. I think he's got some really interesting thoughts, and he's been privy to a lot of these conversations for a number of years, so he's seen this coming for a while. One thing I want to point out, while the PFAA has a lot of really cool and interesting goals for athletes and to improve athlete experiences in this sport and in functional fitness, it's not a union. They don't all have a common employer. So this isn't going to be like some of the major professional sports leagues in the United States where the athletes are unionized and the organization operates as a union. This technically isn't a union. I'm not sure if you would call it an interest association or how we might categorize it, but as of now, it's not a union. They don't all have a common employer. That's an important distinction that I do want to bring up on this video. There you have it, the Professional Fitness Athletes Association. Some of the top functional fitness, top CrossFit Games athletes in the world coming together, asking for a seat at the table, and trying to make their voice heard when it comes to how competitions are run, how the competition season is run, safety standards, event standards, you name it. There are a lot of goals, and it's at a very early stage. But it's interesting to see the work that the PFAA has done already, to hear about the conversations they've had already. It's interesting to note they haven't all been in the same room doing this. We're still in the middle of a global pandemic. So they've gotten this off the ground and started to organize and gotten all 60 individually qualified CrossFit Games athletes for the 2020 Games on board remotely. Pretty darn impressive. So I wouldn't count them out to accomplish a lot of their goals in the very near term, because what they've already done from an organizational standpoint, I personally find very impressive. For more news from the fitness world, the strength world, make sure to tune into barbend.com and here on our YouTube channel. Thanks so much for watching. I'm David Thomas Tao.